right here. We're resolving a bunch of things for people because there's a lot of file locations that happen that are working with a static site. Let's see, we have our final config. So like, here's the defaults, here's the user's config, and then here are like our kind of materialized ones that we merged with the user. You're going to see some environment variables throughout. That's so the client knows, like this is the prefetch rate that happened, and the client knows what that is. And these might change in the future, but for now we're using process environment. So the other thing that happens here is it resolves all the plugins. And the plugin system is something very new. It's likely to change, but for now, basically just recurses down through a plugin array. If you guys have looked at the plugin API, it's not too complex. It just recurses through, loads all the plugin paths. It doesn't necessarily execute them, but it requires the plugins themselves and makes them readily available. And it just attaches them onto the config right here. And there's a little hook right here. So this is what most of the hooks look like in React Static. There is, you say get plugin hooks from the config plugins. You can say which hook you want. You basically reduce over it, passing each value down throughout all the plugins. And this actually flattens them out and recurses through them for you. And it comes back with the final value. So I don't want to dig too much into that, but that's kind of like a high-level overview of how plugins work right now. So after the get config is done, it goes into start. It goes back to start. So let's see, we got the config, and this is using, okay, this is going to freak you out. I'm using await here, and there is a callback function. So it's like WTF, why are you using await and a callback? Well, I'm using a callback here because, honestly, I don't want to go through this whole observer thing and introduce observers into this library yet. But this is the simplest way to do a subscription. So yeah, I can await the get config here. But I'm also using this as the callback for when the config changes. So every time the config changes, it's running this function right here as well. So it comes through and it cleans the temp directory, which in this case, the dist is the temp directory for development. It fetches the site data, which actually is going to call the get site data function on your config and get the site data. It creates a dummy component for the index.html using your document or the default document. And then right here, it prepares the routes. So all prepare routes does, let's see, subscribes and prepares routes. So the prepare routes is really cool because routes can come from your static.config, or in V6, which is something new, you can also have routes come from a pages directory right here. So index would be, this would be /blog, this would be /home, this would be your 404. And as you add and remove and edit those files in here, it's subscribing to this as well. So you'll see the prepare routes uses a subscriber callback as well, which when the routes change, it reloads the routes and it restarts, or it starts the dev server, which in this case, it'll just hot reload. So once the routes are ready, it goes straight into the dev server, which is in Webpack index. And let's see. So the Webpack dev server is doing a lot of stuff. There are 3 different Webpack configurations. There's a stage for dev, which is Webpack config dev, and you can see Webpack config dev right here. There's a production Webpack configuration, which is the same thing, Webpack prod, right there. And then there's also a node stage, which uses Webpack prod just with some small little alterations. So we pass the is node true here. So for dev, it goes through, creates the Webpack configuration, resolves all of the loaders, goes through all the transformers and plugins that may alter the Webpack configuration. And then when it starts the dev server, it figures out, okay, here's the compiler we're using, which is the dev webpack, which we use to build the compiler right here. Then it finds an open port, defaults to 3000 or uses the port or uses this out of the config. It also has a message port, and this isn't for the dev server. This is for the data hot reloading. So if you see a message port that's different, this is for data hot reloading. And then we start the Webpack server. This is just a Webpack server configuration. Right here, we use the express hooks in the Webpack dev server to provide on-the-fly endpoints for the development version of the client. So the browser will request site data from this endpoint in dev. That way it can always get the most up-to-date site data. So this is where it actually requests the site data for the development version. And then right here is where all the route information is made available. So it asks for the route info using the path of the route. And this will return the route info. And it returns it every time it's requested. So that's why you can hot reload your data inside of your app without having to restart the server. And that's it. It does all the logging, kind of, the messaging here, build complete, oh, build failed or whatever. Yeah, and then starts listening. And that's the whole dev server life cycle. I haven't gone over the actual, I haven't gone over the client side yet, but as far as like the dev server part, did I miss anything? Does anybody have any questions about that? I think I got it all. I guess I did miss something. In the prepare routes, let's see, prepare routes would be in static index. So prepare routes will actually extract all of the templates from every single route that has been defined and puts those templates on the config. And I know you guys have seen in the in any React static project, there's a routes component that you just render that magically knows the route that you're on. That comes from a generated file right here. We code gen that file. So it's still built in React. We're just code generating it to have all of the templates and know how to resolve which template for which page. Something that you're probably going to end up in this file sooner or later. So just know that it's a generated file. It happens on dev and on production builds. Socket, yeah, so that's all the start command. Sorry, I feel like I'm really going fast on this stuff, but I know that you guys probably don't have a lot of time. So any questions so far?
Nope.
Okay. Let's get to the bundle step. Okay, so I know if you guys have ever used React Static, you probably don't say React Static bundle, and that's because there's a build command that does both bundling and exporting at the same time. But under the hood, they're actually two separate stages. First you bundle, then you export the routes. This is this way so that in the future, you could technically change your site data and just run an export without having to rebundle your application, which is really, really nifty. And this is also going to pave the way towards doing incremental builds as well. So you're only exporting a couple of routes instead of all of them. So let's go into the bundle. And when the bundling runs, part of this is a lot of the same as dev, except for just different environment variables and different configs. So the bundling is going to come through and get the config, just like it did before in the dev. It cleans the dist directory, which in this case is going to be the actual dist directory, not the temporary directory for dev. It does some asset management here. This was contributed by someone in React Static. I can't remember who, but this is genius. You can have external assets and write your assets to separate asset folders for like things like S3. If you don't have all of your files in the same location, this is kind of a cool pipeline. It hasn't come out yet. I think this is V6 only. So then right here, it prepares the routes. So just kind of normalize all the routes, get everything ready to go. It doesn't call the routes or get the data for them just yet. But we make sure that dev is false because we want production level stuff. So it's going to go and get all the routes and put them on the config. And then right here, it copies the public directory, which is pretty straightforward. And then right here, it builds the production bundles. So build production bundles comes from Webpack, let's see, static Webpack index. So build production bundles. Basically goes through and it says, hey, we need 2 Webpack configurations. We need one for prod and we need one for node, which these are going to have the same, these are both prod, right? But one of them has some interesting changes if it's only node, like using node externals, making sure we only have certain plugins, making sure that we have the static file name. This is exactly why you have to write node safe code, is because your code is being executed on the server as well as in the browser. So let's see what crap my last that file index. There we go. Okay, so it grabs the configuration files. Let's see. It takes the stats from the build. And let's see. Okay, it runs both of those. And then it takes each of the stats for both of those builds and saves them to a file. You'll see it kind of checks some of the stats here, make sure that we don't have any errors. And then we put both of those client stats to JSON in the temp directory so that the export stage can re-import these and rehydrate all of the Webpack information about the build. This is also something that enables incremental builds and just re-exports without having to bundle again. So after that, I don't think anything else happens after that. If the bundle analyzer is set to true, it just creates a never-ending promise here, and the bundle analyzer opens. And that happens in here, but we don't want to close the CLI until the user hits, Command C, Control C. So we just make a never-ending promise right here. Otherwise, we return the config because the build stage will get the resulting config from the bundle and pass it into the exporter. So let's go into the export. This is where a lot of the magic happens. Now, Swix, you were asking like, okay, where does like the data chunking and everything happen? Like this is where the magic starts to happen. Up until now, it's just like been a bunch of Webpack configuration and environment variables, and yeah, it's kind of exhausting. So the export is where it really gets cool. So first, it builds the configuration if it's not already built. It prepares the routes if they're not already prepared. And then it exports the routes. So you'll see it's rehydrating the client stats from the JSON files, which is important. And then we go into export routes, which takes the config and the client stats and goes to town. Export routes is located in static index. Export routes. Okay, so first, we fetch the site data for all of the config. Now, fetch site data up here will go through, it's just one call basically for the site data, so it just grabs it and returns the site data. Nothing special happening there. Fetch routes is where things really start to get interesting. So right here, I don't know if you guys have ever read through the part of the docs that talk about the prop sharing, but let's see, I know it's in here. Prop splitting. Okay. So prop splitting is something that when you provide props in this get data function for a route, all of these props are compared to one another for every single route in an attempt to find common props. So you can see support menu is actually used here and here in these two different routes, and they're actually the same object. Like they're triple equals the same object. So we have a way where we go through and detect that and pull these, like we would pull support menu out into a shared prop so that you only load it one time instead of loading it, for however many routes you have. So I show people this is something that you shouldn't do, where like you would pass support menu here, but then you'd pass like an alter. There should be a colon right there. That's stupid of me. You pass support menu, like if you mutate the object, they're not triple equals, so it's not going to pull them out. So quick high level overview of prop sharing, but that's what's happening here. We go through and we have a map set for props, for scene props and shared props. And we go through all the routes, and for every single route, we are going to go and get the route data, right, and put it in all props. So this is actually calling your route get data function. We hand it the, dev false route, and then whatever data you return goes into all props. We have some defaults, and then right here, we loop through all of the props that you returned, right? And for every single one of those props, we check. This is really naive and it can become very smart. And this is why I need your guys' help, is because I'm only one person. And if we put our heads together right here, this could get really cool. So first it says, hey, for strings that are less than 100 characters, don't share those. Just embed them in every single JSON file for every route. If it's a Boolean number or undefined, like don't pull those out, don't share those. But right here, basically, if it's an object or an array, we probably want to share it. And this is just a naive decision, but it's worked out great so far. So it checks if it's seen it. And if it has already seen it and it's not in shared props, then it will stringify the prop, set it into shared props, and give it a hash. And this hash is so that we know we can call it later, right, as the site's loading. And this hash is stored next to all the other normal props. So we're doing data progress tick is just for like a loader, basically. And then right here, so after we have looked at all the props, then let's see, download. Oh yeah, this is just a task queue. So this isn't actually executing until we put download tasks into the pool. So we're only doing this for the output file rate at a time. So this is just some concurrency management that I wrote. It's called Swimmer. Pool all comes from Swimmer. You guys should go check out Swimmer. It's really cool. So let's see, where was I? Pool all, export shared route data, pool. Okay, right here. So then right here, we are actually writing the data out to the files. So Swix, this is kind of probably where you wanted to see what we're doing, but we're going through every single route again, and we're determining what the local props are for the route, what the shared props hashes are. So if any props were shared, we store the hashes so that we know where to retrieve them from. And then we loop through all the props and we say, okay, is it a shared prop? Keep it in local, or put it in the shared prop hash, or is it a local prop? Just keep it here. And then we pool all those. This isn't actually writing the data yet. It's just building the prop maps, which is local props and shared prop hashes. And then right here, it exports the shared route data. So exporting the shared route data is really simple. It goes through and it says, let's see, shared props array. Are there any shared props? If so, write each of them out to the static data directory with the hash name.json. So I'll be able to show you a shared prop in a directory here really quick. Let's see who has that? Does Nozzle have that? We come to the network tab, reload. So let's see, home, bootstrap, main. See if we go to the dev blog, it will have it. Okay, so the route info for this path right here, dev blog task JavaScript, has a shared props hash. So if we look in our requests, we should see that shared props requested somewhere. Be Z2ENH. Maybe we actually have to go to the JavaScript page for it to request. Anyways, this Z2ENHVW is likely just a, let's see, it goes to, I can't remember where it goes, but it basically goes to like static data slash Z2ENHVV.json. And it has that shared prop in there. And that's where it retrieves it from. So we're writing those files right here based on the path, or based on the hash, not the path. Since they're shared, they don't necessarily have a path name where they live. They just kind of live at the root of the site. And then, let's see, after the export shared route data, we are done with the fetch routes. So fetch routes. So we're not writing the JSON for individual routes yet because that's a fairly expensive task if you have tens of thousands of pages in your site. The shared route or the shared props isn't too expensive because if they're shared, we're probably only writing, some magnitude lower of how many routes there are. But the build HTML step is where all of the individual route stuff happens. So build HTML is probably one of the cooler areas of React Static. This is where this is a very hot path because if you have 10,000 routes, this function's getting run 10,000 times. Well, not this function exactly, but one of the exporters is. So first we go through and we figure out, let's see, if we're only exporting on a single thread, it's really easy. We can just call the exporter with the config, the routes, the site data, the client stats, and the exporter will handle that. If we're doing multi-threaded support, which is something only V6 has now, this is something I worked really hard on, is we figure out how many threads to use based on the config max threads or just how many physical cores does the user have, and we kind of max that out. Don't use more than we have. We create a progress ticker. And then right here, we're going to create a couple of exporters. An exporter basically is based on how many threads we have. So go through the threads, create an exporter, and this is where we are creating a new worker, a node. It's a new thread, and we call threaded exporter. We pass through the environment. We make sure that it knows that it's a slave, right? And we have it inherit all of the standard I/O stuff for the CLI. So any messages coming out of this process are going to show through on the CLI. And then for each of those exporters, we are going to split the routes up equally between all of those exporters and push those routes into the exporter. So for each exporter, we send it the config and only the routes that it's supposed to handle. So if you have, 1,000 routes and you've got 4 threads, then each thread is going to handle 250 routes. That's what gets sent through right here. If there's an error, then we're going to error out the build. If there's a log, we log it. If it gets done with one of them, which is a tick, then we increment the progress, and if it's done, then we resolve our promise. So this is mostly just the task runner. Swix, I keep telling you that I'm going to show you the code that actually writes the HTML. So I think we are about there. So right here for single-threaded export, there's just a file called exporter. This just takes all of the routes and writes them to the file or to files. So right here, this is the easiest way to understand before we get into the threaded export. We go in and we get the component, the top level component for your app, which was the bundle that was done for static. Now this is the node bundle. So there's a static version which was produced from the node environment Webpack configuration, and there's also an app which is for the browser and the client. We're using the static one because we know that it's safe to run in Node. So we get that component, we get our document template, and then we just loop through and we export a route using, we just call this export route function with the config, the final component, the document template, the individual route, the site data, and the client stats. And I'm going to keep this open and we're going to look at export route here. So we're really getting into the meat of React static. This is awesome. So hey, look, finally we see React Universal Component and Webpack Flush chunks and React DOM server. So these are the things that you'd expect to see in an SSG. So we have some components, some component factories that we have here, like building things for HTML tags and head tags and body tags. But we use, and in fact, it's sad because we're still using the old context, and this is something we need to upgrade in V6, which won't be that hard at all. But we're passing down any route info for the route through route info context. And we're also passing down the static URL, which is just the path through context. This is so that any of the React static components that the user uses in their app has access to the route info and static URL, and they don't even have to use this context provider because we do it for them right here. So when a route is exported, we grab some stuff off the route, we find the base path, we have an href replace regex and a source replace regex to make sure that we are writing out the right sources and paths for everything. A lot of this stuff is a little contrived, but just play along until we can talk about it. So now we create the route info object. The route info object is what's going to get written to the disk as a .json for the route. So if you have like about, if you have a route like about, there's going to be a folder structure where there's about, and then there's going to be route data.json right here. And you've probably seen that when you export your sites. So this is what's getting written to that location, is this object. We're going to decorate it a little bit, but we make sure it has the path that it's on. We give it the template ID, which is generated from Webpack Flush chunks. Let's see, template ID. Yeah, the template ID is retrieved when we build the bundle. When we bundled, it pulled out all the individual templates and assigned the template to the actual route. So we know which template chunk ID goes to which route. So we make sure that it knows that. We make sure that it knows any hashes of shared props that it needs to fetch, and then we just give it the local props that were unique to the page. There's also some embedded route info, which gets inlined into the HTML. It only includes full props, not the partials. So what we do is we put route info in there. We give it all of the props because when a page loads for the first time and you're bootstrapping React into your entry point, we don't have time to go request the JSON file for this page. If we were to do that, you'd see a flash of unstyled content. You'd see the normal HTML that got exported, then you'd see a loading screen, and then you'd see it again. So we embed all of the props, even the shared props, into this embedded route info, which gets put into the HTML for every page. And that's what keeps the first page load really fast and really looking good, and makes it so that React can behave synchronously still. So we have a bunch of places where we're tracking render meta, chunk names, things that should go into the head. We're tracking client scripts and style sheets and CSS that should go into the HTML. And then we're going to have a final component here. So if there's a redirect on the route, we just make a redirect page, basically. This is like a soft redirect. You can do redirects at the server level, which is suggested, but you can also do them at runtime right here. And this will do like, head tags with redirect meta tags and stuff. Otherwise, we're going to use the report chunks, which this is kind of an advanced usage of the chunk reporter. This is probably something that if Zach wanted to explain a little bit of this, he could. He probably knows this better than I do. Zach, do you got anything to say?
So yeah, pretty much chunk reporter. There's two ways to actually manage how Universal works. One of them is all-encompassing, where the render takes place at the same time as the
bundling.
Yeah, pretty much the chunks are reported at the time of render, and then there's another one where you can pretty much export out the report and then consume the report at a later time or by a separate build. So this is a way to pretty much externalize what Universal does, so you're not depending on a server to actually put things together.
Right. And so this is where we are determining which chunks are used in this exact page. So if we were on like, a blog post page, there'd likely only be one chunk. Maybe there'd be multiple if you were doing some manual code splitting. But for the most part, there's one chunk, and it's going to be like the blog post template. And so it's extracting out that chunk name right here and reporting it up to all of the chunks used in this page. And then if you go ahead.
Pretty much what happens is we'll report out the chunk name. Usually it's an array of, if you use Universal, throughout the page, then you would have an array come out in the order they were consumed. What happens then is pretty much we'll push the chunks up, then they'll be flushed out. And what we do is we take the chunk name that you got, and that's where we start resolving it inside of Webpack's chunk graph. And then from there, we do like a bunch of lookups to find all of those aggressively split chunks that Webpack 4 is now spitting out automatically. So yeah, that's pretty much what happens. Even though it's only one chunk that you named, you end up with like 7 or 8 chunks actually getting flushed to the client.
Right. That's the magic of flush chunks, of the stuff that he has written and maintained. It's really cool. That's what makes it so easy for us to do what we do right here. Otherwise, it'd be real messy. You can see right here, there's this initial props context, which is that context provider I described up above. We're just giving it the embedded route info so that any route data or site data props on the page have access through context to all of the route data. That's how it's provided. And then we finally render the user's top level app component right here. Make sure to pass through any props that there may be. And then right here, render to string and extract. This is where we start getting into actual HTML generation. So render to string and extract, this is split up into a couple of different segments, but really what we're interested in the end is just the app HTML. So there's a couple of stages. First, here's a new nifty little plugin that you probably have never seen if you're using V5. But there's a plugin here called Before Render to Element. So this is taking a component, the final component, and letting you, modify it before it becomes an actual JSX element. And then right here, we are letting you also config render to element. So this is your render to element function, which just defaults to basically this. Takes the component and renders the component like this. Like that's all rendering to a JSX element really is. But you'd be surprised at all the things you need to do there. So we provide a plugin there. So we have a rendered component now. It's a JSX element. And before we put it into HTML, there's another hook that says, hey, before you render this to HTML, let me do some stuff with it. So if you have a JSX element and you want to walk it or do whatever you want, you can do that here. And then there's a rendered component, which is still a JSX element. That is what finally gets passed to the render to HTML function, which if you go and look at the get config, there's a render to HTML. So render to element, as I showed you before, is just a simple thing. Render to HTML gives you the render function and gives you the component and just says, how, just do this. This is the default one. Sometimes you do things with emotion here or styled components, like if you need to, take styles and embed them into the actual HTML that's produced. This is here so that you have capability to do that. And not only is it in the config, but there's also a before render to HTML. This is where plugins like emotion and style components are hooking in to do their magic. And then it renders. So we pass the render to string and extract function as the renderer. The reason we do that is because if we just pass them render to string out of the gate, then like we wouldn't have an opportunity to do some synchronous stuff right here. So first we render the component to string to an HTML string. And then that's when we flush chunks. So normally this is done in a simpler way, but since we're doing it kind of like incrementally and separated from when the Webpack bundle happens, after you render to string, there's a bunch of chunk names in the flush chunks cache, and we need to flush them out to get the scripts, the style sheets, and the CSS that were used in this HTML. So we keep track of those. And then we also do helmet here. If you don't know what helmet is, it's a way to manage head tags with React. This is where you are able to go head, and then say meta and do whatever you want, Those are extracted here and go into the head. So we get all of the HTML props, the body props, all this stuff comes out of the helmet render static function. Then we finally return the app HTML right here. And then there's another hook. Hey, we have the final HTML. Before we put that HTML into the document, do you want to do anything with it? And right here, before HTML to document. So right now we have like our app. We have like the root, like the div with the ID of root. This is what we have so far. We don't have any of the head or the body or any of this surrounding document information just yet. So this is where we do that. So document HTML is formed by rendering to static markup the following JSX. This is where we take your document template, which is defined in static.config or in your config file. We make the head with all the head information that was extracted, or the HTML. We make the HTML tag. We make the head tag with all this information, and we make the body. We pass it site data and route info. That's so you can use that information and render meta in your document template. And that produces, and this is where we say, hey, you know what, we need a root. We don't expect the user to have to do this. So we put a root in there, and we dangerously set the inner HTML to the app HTML that we produced up here. And that's the document. So HTML now just becomes doc type HTML, and we dump our final document HTML into that string. this is where we say, okay, before we're rendering the document to file, run this plugin on this HTML. So it's HTML, it returns HTML. This is also where we might need to go through and kind of rewrite some of the paths and some of the links. If we have different public paths, or if we want to disable route prefixing, this is where we're using those regexes to go through and replace a bunch of just raw text. And then right here, we just check and see, is it the 404 file? Then we don't nest it in the route path file structure. We just put it at 404. If it isn't, then Swix. This is where the file gets written. We put it in the dist file. We join it up with the route path, which may be pretty nested, right? So this is like dist blog post 1/index.html. And that HTML file gets written right here. So the route info file name is, let's see, the route info file name is that same exact thing, except for it will basically be routeinfo.json. Yay, we have our files. So we fs output the file with the HTML, and then as long as it's not a redirect, we put the route info, the routeinfo.json right there as well. And that's what exports a route. Woo! Very cool.
Nice work. Nice.
Okay, so kind of to wrap, let's see, let me make sure I didn't forget anything. So it writes the JSON, that's where it does the route. So shared data, yeah, whoa.
Just to be clear, is there one shared data for every site, or how does,
no? I will show you.
Yeah.
I'll show you the shared data here in a minute. Basically, say that say you have say you're doing documentation, and your menu uses some JSON, but it uses it in every single page, right?
Yeah.
So instead of writing that JSON file, like instead of writing that JSON file 50 times for every 50 pages that you have, it's exactly the same. It just puts it in shared data.
Yeah.
And it'll be some hash, right?
Oh, okay. So it's on a per component level.
No, it's on the route level. So say get this. I'm gonna have to show you in a better playground. Hold on a second. Let me finish this one little thought with the multi-threaded export, and then I'll show you that.
Yep.
Okay, so let me make sure I didn't alter anything here. What the heck? All right, I'll just have to undo my changes in Git. But okay, so that was for the normal exporter. So I told you guys right here that if you do multi-threaded export, this is where things start to get kind of crazy. So there's a threaded exporter right here that is pretty intense, pretty cool though. So basically it creates a new process, and when this process receives a message, we want to take the payload and do something with it. So in this case, we're sending each thread all of the config and all of the routes that it needs to export. The problem with doing multi-threaded stuff is you lose a lot of, it has to be serialized across a JSON threshold. So you can't just send through a function. You can't send through a function to a thread. Like, it has to be serialized, and functions are not serializable. So we have to go get the config again for each thread that we do. And we do that so that we have all the original functions instead of just serialized version. And we basically do the same exact thing here. We get the component, we're doing all this. And each thread is doing the same exact thing as the normal exporter, except for this time, each time that we're doing it, we're sending back a tick to make sure that the parent process knows that one of them was done. We're doing this still at an output file rate cap. So this is a task queue again right here. When they're all done, we say, hey, we're done. If there's an error, we send back the error itself. We exit with an error code of 1. So even though this looks simple, it was definitely hard to orchestrate. And one of the things too is when we're forking resolve threaded exporter, that we have to put through React static slave, because in this index, oh, where am I looking? I thought I was looking for that somewhere. Maybe we don't use that. But that's just basically an environment variable for you to make sure that, oh, you use that in your static.config right here. If you're doing threaded exporting, you basically have to say if process.end .react static slave equals true. You don't want to be fetching data twice. Does that make sense? So I'll have to show you a better example of this. This is only going to be a problem for really large sites, so I don't want to worry about that for now. So yeah, threaded export. I guess it's easier than I thought it was going to be to explain it. It's just making new workers in Node and running the same functions as a normal export does. Okay, what was I going to say next? I was going to tell Swix about, oh, the shared prop stuff.
The shared prop, yeah.
Okay. So I'm trying to think of a good example of shared props. Maybe I can just create one for you. So let's start this. CD examples, basic, yarn link react static. And then, so shared props. I'm just going to show you how it works right now. It's honestly the easiest way to do it, I think. So say we have just a basic thing here. And we're sending through posts, and each post goes to its own page. And these posts are not shared between pages. So they will not be a shared prop. But let's make something that would be a shared prop. And let's just say like some info, right? And this is an object that, basically says foo bar. Okay. Let's say we used this info in every single page. We used it in, let's see. We used it in the index page. So we'll do here, and we'll say get data. And we'll pass some info there. And then we use it in the blog too, and we use it in posts. So maybe it's something that we need in most pages, but not all of them. You could put it in site data if you wanted, right? But say you don't want to put it there, you only need it in some pages. So if we do this and we say yarn build, find module bin. What is going on here? Oh, yarn. It's really difficult switching between master and v6. There's so many like stupid little Babel artifacts and things that like get left behind. It really bugs me.
I typically just do different folders for that and stuff.
So, okay. Yarn build, yarn link. Glamorous, of course. Somebody please tell me how to fix this right here. It's like orphaned directories. There we go. Okay, yarn build, please work. Realize I'm showing you this on v6 branch that's probably not very stable. Okay, so routes built, templates built, bundling app. So let's open the directory for this site that we just built. So if you look at basic here, this is the dist file for our build. Looks like we ran into some errors, which is totally fine because build exponent could not load React static. Don't worry about that. Let's just make sure we have our site data here. Okay. So here's the main bundle. Here's the generated React static routes. There's the static bundle. I think it didn't export any of the pages per se, but these are those shared props. So if you come look at this right here, this shared prop is a user. Looks like it's a, there it is, foobar. So since foobar was used in multiple routes, instead of foobar going into every single route information, like route file,
Gotcha.
it goes into this hash right here, and this hash is then put into every single route info file. So it has a way to request it right here.
Perfect.
I hope that makes more sense. I'm sorry I didn't show you with a build that was working, but
yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, that was good.
So sorry about that. Okay, so one of the last things I need to do is before I really want to. Yeah, what's up?
Can I ask something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you're trying to like request for a JSON data file, how can you know that it is like a shared data or in the route level?
Well, that's the good thing is you don't have to know in the client, but the client does know. I'm about to go over the client code, and this might answer that question. So there's a browser. So there's a browser index file right here. That this is if you go to index.js, this is what gets exported to the user. There's the route data component, the with route data higher order component. There's the loading, the prefetch component, prefetch when seen, all the routing stuff. There's some utilities like scroll to, some deprecations. Here's some React router components. So these components, most of them live in their own little files, but there's also there's an index browser file that gets imported in a couple of places. This is where all of the preloading and route data fetching stuff lives on the client. We keep track of route info objects by their path, and then we also keep track of props by their hash in this object. And this is all per session in memory in JavaScript. It's not like a service worker or anything yet. It could be. We also keep track of in-flight requests to route infos and hashes so that we're not double requesting things. And then we also have a prefetch rate so that if you have 200 links on your page visible, we're not fetching 200 at a time. We're fetching a reasonable amount of them at the same time. So let's see. A lot of this is for development. So in development, we are, using the socket to make sure that we're listening for when we need to reload routes, if the routes change or if route data changes. But right here, this get route info, this is a method shared by a lot of different components, but mostly the route data component uses this. So route info, let me just walk you through this. So the first thing that happens really quickly, I kind of have a talk and a diagram about this, but the HTML is rendered, and then React mounts on top of the existing HTML. And if you look at the router component, this router component is required to use React Static because it's doing a lot of important things. First of all, it is bootstrapping the data that we embedded originally into the first page we load. It's bootstrapping that data into the shared route information so that React can mount and render synchronously. Otherwise, we'd see that flash of loading which we don't want. And if it's in development, you'll notice that when you develop in your site, sometimes you'll see a little spinner actually. And this is because we don't embed the data for development. We don't have to do that. It's okay to see a little loader on your first page load. So we actually just go and get the route info through the server that way. The router also is responsible for patching the history navigation. This might feel dirty to some of you, but basically whatever the history object is that we've been given, we monkey patch, push, and replace with our own special versions. So we take the history method and we turn it into an asynchronous function. And we clean the path. We make sure that we know we can set loading if it is or not. We can figure out really quickly whether we need to prefetch a route or not, based on if it's loaded into the cache already, or if it's even a page that we need to prefetch at all. If it is, then we can prefetch that path. And you guys, I can show you the prefetch method here in a little bit. But if they're navigating, we prefetch with a priority of true, so that it kicks at, if we're already like preloading a bunch of other pages and they click on a link that's not prefetched, we need it to load faster than all the others. So we will cancel them, or we will delay them, and we'll prefetch this route as soon as possible. And then when we're done, it's cool. We take the original method that was on the history object and we just apply it. Again, we just use the resolved history, the original args, and we say, okay, that original navigation event can go ahead now. And we keep track if it's patched or not. That's pretty neat right there. But that's one thing where using reach router and having suspense might change. But for now, that's what we have to do, because we don't want to load that new path until all of the data and all of the templates are ready for it. Sometimes they're preloaded, sometimes they're not. And so this is how we wait to make sure that those are. Did somebody have a question on that?
Nope.
Okay. And then the router, we're resolving some history. Sometimes people want memory or hash histories. We have an error wrapper. We have a scroller manager right here. That's really all that's happening with the router and when things mount. Let's see, link and prefetch. Some of the stuff I don't feel like I need to go over in this call, but link and prefetch components are used to manually preload templates. But the regular link component in here uses this new intersection API. So let's see, prefetch when seen. Prefetch when seen is pretty cool. So it uses the intersection observer, if it's there, to figure out if a link is visible on the page. And if it is, then it goes and prefetches that data, which is pretty simple to understand if you look at the components. We don't need to go over it right now. History is monkey patched. All data is cached in the session and made available to route data on the fly. So route data is probably one of the more complex components. This is where you're going to see a bunch of forks like, oh, are we in development? Well, if we're in development, then we need to do things a little differently to go through the Webpack server to get our data. Otherwise, the route data is just using context, and you'll see, let's see right here, component did mount. So, and in fact, we need to upgrade this for React 16 as well to get rid of will mount and stuff like that. But if a route data component loads in production, we're just going to assume that the data is there. And this right here is just a big way to resolve the right props and the right data for a route component. I don't want to get in depth right here. Sometimes it comes from the route info that we embedded. Sometimes it comes from context. Sometimes it comes from route info, all props. Sometimes we couldn't find the route data for the path for some reason, so we show a little warning. But in the end, we have final props, and those props are passed through to the render function. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the client that I really need to go over. Prefetch when seen, loading, link. There's really not a lot to the client except for this index file just is where a lot of like the logic is happening. You know, it needs prefetch components, get component for path. So you don't need to go too in depth there, but that's basically it covers most of React Static and how it works. We went through all the commands except for create. We went through all of the static stuff. So there's all the Webpack stuffs in here. There's an XML builder that we didn't go over. We went through all the exporters, the route generators. We didn't go over generate routes, but that's too in depth right now. I don't want to go over that yet. And then get config, get routes. We went through most of this. And then, yeah, and then there's components like the server side components that do the document stuff. So, I mean, as you can see, other than that, there's just a utility folder, which has, there's some shared utilities that go between the node and the browser context. So if a utility is used in both places, it has to be in here so that it's node safe. Otherwise, there's a bin helper, a chunk builder, some other little random little helpers. So that I basically just took you through all of React Static, high level at least. To actually look at the code, you guys are going to have to go through and look at it. You can do that, as you go, as you're looking at issues and as you're helping build features and stuff. But yeah, that's the high level overview. Any questions so far?
So for your router, what are the features that you're looking for it? Because I see you're doing a lot of asynchronous stuff in here to like manage, when routes are actually triggered and stuff like that. I'm seeing a lot of overlaps between like the asynchronous side of things and pretty much, verifying the data is there with any components that might be required
Right.
in one go. I'm working on a new release for a router that does a lot of what you currently have. So I'm just wondering like what you're looking for.
I'm going to think about that for just a second. I got to run in the other room for like a minute. I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.
I have to ask, are you near a road or something? Because you have a lot of background noise.
Sorry, say that again?
Are you next to a road or something? Because you have a ton of background noise all the time.
Oh, sorry. Let me turn off all these fans. Okay, is that any better?
That's a lot better.
So yeah, let's talk. Might as well talk about the router right now. So that's on our actual to-do list. So this is where I don't want to talk a lot. Like I want to get your guys' opinions. So right now the router right now is React Router, and it really is great. It gets the job done. It's been doing a great job for years for a lot of people. But right now, I feel like the routing API for React Static is never really going to be something that you can just swap in and out. You know what I mean? Like, hey, use this router or use that router. And routers are changing all the time and getting better, and especially with like concurrent React, not async, apparently, concurrent React and suspense coming down the road, router functionality is going to change quite a bit. And that's why I think we need to focus on building our own API for React Static, our own router API. You know, and that I think that needs to contain things like, you know, like a navigate function that can do a lot of cool stuff. And of course, it needs to have the router component, and it needs to have link components, and you know, all that stuff. It needs to also have route components. And whether we use React Router or Reach Router or whatever router under the hood, it doesn't really matter to me, but I think it's time we proxy our own API. I'm already doing that with a lot of the methods. I have just mimicked the React Router API so that people are familiar with it. But if you notice in the components, there's a lot of, let's see, in the browser components, there's a lot of these that like link. In fact, I'll just show you the index right here. If you come to the index, I'm only exporting straight through these ones from React Router DOM with router, switch, route, all the other ones like, where is it? Navlink and link and redirect. These are all coming from our own special little versions, you know, because we have to have added functionality there. We can't just like let people use whatever they want. We need control over the routing. So, you know, we need to build our own. That's really what it comes down to. I am still leaning toward Reach Router because I know that the accessibility is so good. Like I've talked with Ryan about it enough to know that like he has done a really good job to make sure that it's going to be very future proof. And just like us, he's staying very unopinionated about how it works. It also has support for relative links and you know, true modular routing in apps. So I think Reach Router is the way to go. And you know, other than fleshing out our own API, it'd be pretty simple to just swap Reach Router in. But you know, I'd be open to hearing other ideas about it, though. You know, I'm not decided on that, but I would really like to discuss the pros and cons of any other routers.
Okay. Yeah, that gives good insight into what you need. I guess this might be a discussion that we can take offline and just see if there's anything we can cannibalize from some of the stuff that I'm working on with these routing mechanisms. Because I had a similar idea where I pretty much try to build out an API. So essentially, it just, you know, manages stuff. But
Yeah.
in terms of like how you actually get the data and patch your own middleware and whatever else you want, it pretty much does the management side, and it's pretty loose on integration. But it depends on like when I ship and things like that. So it'll be something just to check out, see what you need, see if I can tailor things more to the project.
Well, and you know, a good test a good test for long-term stuff is, you know, we could move to Reach Router, and if we want to use a different one, the great thing about proxying all of our own router API now is that we can switch out the underlying implementation. No one needs to know if it's better, faster, reduces our code base size or whatever. That's great. You know, as long as we're developing a good API for React Static, then that's really what matters. So
yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so other things I wanted to discuss. Okay, we really need to talk about it. I've been putting it off for long enough. Release automation. Is there anyone on this call, please, do you know how to do release automation? I've tried it with semantic release. Man, I must be an idiot, but I just can't get it work right. I have like it's accidentally published the v6 on the latest branch. I'm sure you guys run into that. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing on the semantic release stuff. I'm watching Kent C. Dodds like, release 5 libraries while he's like sitting there sipping a Diet Coke or something. He's like, "Oh, I didn't do anything. We just, did a PR and everything's managed." I'm like, freak. Anytime anything changes in React Static, I got to go in and release a build, and it's pissing me off. So
yeah, it's kind of depends on how far you want to go with it, because I've done a lot of releases for big companies and helped the release management for libraries, modules, sites, whatever. The problem is once you go, it's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down.
yeah,
It gets really complicated. So I kind of agree that there should be an automation to it, but you should try to keep it as simple as possible, because once you start using libraries or start setting up different servers to release it,
right.
it's so complicated, nobody knows
Like,
anymore.
honestly, what I want is I just want Travis to run tests, right? And if the tests pass, then I want it to push the release to the proper branch, right? And whether that's master, whether that's like an actual like release or a beta or like, I don't care. I just want to be able, and I know that this stuff is probably going to come from, it's probably going to come from the branch plus, the PR description or notes or something like that. I don't know how that works. I just know that people have done it and we need to replicate it.
This is something I'd be very interested in following along. I'm having the same growing pains with Universal. Pretty much the automation worked for a while and then it stopped, and I've got no clue how to fix it. So if anybody has any ideas on it, I'd love to follow along to how you guys put it together.
Yeah. So
I set up Travis myself, but it's only for some private repos and stuff. And I never did multiple branches, so I feel like we should just, I don't know, dig into this. It sounds like it's a common blueprint.
yeah, it's funny that the original title for maintainers and publishing was like, "Hey, we need to get." They were like, "Hey, we need to figure out this automation thing." So maintainers and contributors really is what this discussion is about. But there needs to be a new issue about release automation. And we can just discuss it here. But it needs to happen as soon as possible. So if everybody wants to like dig in and just find out whatever they can about it, maybe we can look at some libraries, that have done this successfully.
You say you've tried semantic release. What issues did you run into with it?
Man, I don't know if it was just like I couldn't get it to release on the right tags. I couldn't get it to, as you saw, like it released on latest and stuff when it was supposed to release on next or v6 or whatever, right? So yeah, I would like to use semantic release. I know that's what a lot of sites use. So how to do this correctly. Also, how are we going to combine this with change log, release notes,
And
tags. So yeah, I tried semantic release, and honestly, maybe I was just in a hurry and I didn't do something right. But I know that's probably the best route to go. But I just don't have a lot of experience setting up, Travis CI pipelines and automating all these SSH keys, and there's just so much going on. I could really use some help in that area. So maybe we'll take that discussion offline. If nobody has anything else like super pertinent to add, we can just kind of discuss it here.
Is there Did you talk about V6 like on its own?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We're headed there right now.
Cool.
All right, so we can get out of this right here. Or maybe we shouldn't have done that. I don't know. Okay, so let's see. We talked about release automation really quick, the plugin API, you know, and this would basically be V6 plus the plugin API. Collaboration on GitHub and NPM. We really quickly, we just need to talk about maybe we need to set up some rules for, and I need these rules as well because I'm so bad at it, but like PR descriptions, labels, triaging issues and whatnot. Maybe we should open up, if one of you wants to open up an issue where we can discuss what this needs to look like, that would be really helpful. We can talk about that offline. That's something that every GitHub repo worries about. And that'll also go into like our contributor doc/guidelines. So we talked about that, V6. V6 and the plugin API. Okay, so let's go over V6 really quick. So V6 right now is in a different branch. And the V6 is just bigger, better, faster than, well, hold on, not bigger. It's just better and faster than V5 in every way. Where is the roadmap? So V6 does a lot of different things. So we need to, this needs to go into the to-do, but we need to make sure that everything in here is React 16 plus compatible. You guys have already seen some of the context API is old. We might need to look at, there's some other stuff in there that was React. Oh, and the component life cycles need to be updated to get away from the will stuff. It comes with Babel 7. We've mostly ironed this out. And Webpack 4, we've also ironed most of that out. It's got all the new React Universal and Extract CSS stuff. One of the biggest ones is a multi-threaded export. That wasn't there before. Just so you guys understand, like I was doing some stress testing on Netlify, building sites that were 100,000 pages long, right? And it took builds from like 20 minutes down to 4 or 5 minutes. So multi-threaded export is a big deal. And this is one of the things that was driven by a little bit of healthy competition between me and Kyle at Gatsby. I met with Kyle and we talked about our similarities and differences and whatnot. And we were both striving to get here. Man, and I am hell-bent on making sure that React Static is so fast and so light that if you have a large site there and you need full control, there's no reason why you wouldn't want to use React Static because of the multi-threaded support. The other thing that, what was that?
We should advertise this more actually because a lot of companies rely on build minutes and they have costs per minute.
Yes.
So like, for example, this is one of the reasons why they didn't go with the old version of Gatsby where I work, because it took so long to build that it really cost a lot of money in the long run.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about right here.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I'm glad we're on the same page. Yeah, absolutely. The plugin system, honestly, like I was avoiding a plugin system from the very beginning because I didn't think it needed to be that complicated. But guess what? People want it. People are sick of using templates. They want to be able to plug in, you know, and say, hey, I'm using styled components, or I'm using Glamorous, or I want Google Analytics, or I want all this stuff. And so the plugin system is something that's I just kind of threw together, and it needs more work. This is where we all need to iterate a lot, is the plugin system. Like I want to have V6 out like in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And I have a lot of good ideas for plugins and the plugin system itself. And that's where most of the work needs to go. All this other stuff's probably going to be pretty quick if we put our heads together. So I'll talk about that very last because I want to dig into some code there. The pages directory support. This is something that was in Next.js, where if you guys use V5, you know that if you had a route you had to put it in the route, in the get routes function. You no longer have to do that. If you notice, like in the basic, hold on, let me make sure that I don't have any of those changes in there from basic discard changes. And that needs to stay there. And so does that. Okay. So in the basic static config, you'll notice that the index page, the about page are not here. And you'll also notice that the component for blog is not there either. And that's because it's not even needed. If you come into the basic example, you'll see that there is a pages folder here, and index, it already knows that, hey, this is an index page. Like, you want a page at that location. This is both the route for it and the template. And so here's the home page. Same with about, you know, and the 404 page. Like, this is a one-to-one relationship to routes on your site. There's also a blog page, but it relies on some data. But we've already defined the component that it uses through the pages directory itself. So we don't have to do that again. We just say, hey, this is the page I need you to supply data to. It's only the dynamically generated pages that you have to say, hey, you know what? This is the component. Because if we put post in pages post, then there would be like a /post route on our site, and we don't want that. So people really like this from Next, because if you don't have data that you're using for a site, it's just like a marketing site, you don't even need to use get routes. You can just put it in pages and it feels really easy and clean. So that's something that came with V6.
Can you blacklist pages?
Can you blacklist pages? What do you
Like,
mean?
for example, there's I know a file in there that shouldn't be a route for some reason.
No, you can't. Not yet. So, I mean, we can talk about that, definitely. This is all V6. All this is moldable. For the most part, if there are any extra files or stuff that these pages need, I just, you know, they could import them from containers or components or whatever. So we can talk about that, though. We could easily have blacklisted stuff or do underscores, or we just got to be really careful with that blacklisting stuff. Make sure that the expectations for this directory are the same. And we also need to be able to support things like this, you know, like sub route, and be able to put, you know, other, like, so it'd be sub route / about for the route. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm not exactly sure if that's supported right now. It's kind of a proof of concept. So we need to make sure that that works. Yeah, and let's talk about the pages and blacklisting and stuff. If you would like to go and open an issue about that, that would be helpful so we can keep track of that. Okay, so the biggest thing, the plugin API. Let's go over the plugin API. So right now, plugins are loaded like so. If you go into one of these for like Preact, like the Preact example used to have a bunch of stuff in the Webpack config. Or no, Preact was built into React Static. We don't want that. Like, it should be as easy as just saying plugin React Static plugin Preact. So if you've seen that, there you can come to React Static plugin Preact. I'm pretty sure, yeah, right here. So right now, this is how a plugin looks. It's just an index file, and it exports a default function where this is where plugin options come through. So if you were to do, it's a Babel style. So if you wanted to pass options, you would do this. You would pass through, you know, foo. So that's how options are passed in plugins, and those come through on the function that you're exporting. And then you return just a JavaScript object of mapping hooks to what you want to perform. In this case, we take the Webpack config and we put an alias in there and make sure that we're using Preact compat instead of the React and React DOM. And we only want to do that in production. So that's all a plugin really is. the same thing happens with React Static plugin emotion. So the emotion plugin is really simple too. We come in, we require emotion server, and then in the before HTML to document, we just shove the HTML through the render styles to string. And it pulls them out and then inlines them inside of the HTML. I don't know how it does it. It's amazing, right? And then we are just exporting this. This is run through Babel, actually. So next static plugin. Oh, I guess it's not run through Babel. Whatever. There's also a styled components one that should look very similar as well. So this one's run through Babel right here. This one's a little more complicated. We have to make a style sheet and extract the styles and then wrap them in a style sheet manager around the app. And that will inline the styles, right? So this is how plugins work. Now, the problem with plugins right now is that I only thought about them functioning in the node and server environment when I wrote the way that they work right now. So if you wanted to write a plugin that does something in the browser, for instance, there's actually a there.
Well, did he just drop?
Did you use it?
Yeah, I think he dropped out.
I guess he's sticking around.
Hey guys, you still there?
There he is.
Hey, sorry, that was really weird. I don't know what happened. I think my Chrome crashed. Maybe, I don't know, because I'm trying to do too much. Who knows? Sorry about that. Let's get back into it. It's really cool that it kept it going though, right? So I was saying that these kind of make the assumption that they're executing in the node in a node safe environment on the server. Now we would not want to, if we wanted to do something like, let's see, React static issues. I think there's one about writing a Google Analytics plugin. And maybe the person who's trying to write that is here right now. I'm not sure. Are you here? Who's writing that? Dan Webb. Dan, are you here? Darn it. Okay, so Dan's writing a plugin that does Google Analytics. And it's really neat because in his plugin, he takes the head hook and he puts in the right scripts, which is really neat. Except for he ran into a problem where he says, but I still got some work to make it track the page views between routes, as I explained here. Do you think there's something that can be achieved with the existing hooks, or is a hook needed inside router? Absolutely. We need hooks inside router. In fact, we need hooks inside of all of the client-side stuff. And the problem right now, and this is where I got to tip my hat to Kyle with his plugin system on Gatsby, is that he has, in fact, if you look at Gatsby plugin SaaS is a good one. Gatsby plugin SaaS. He has, in the source file right here, he's got a Gatsby node, but you would also notice with other plugins, there's Gatsby node, Gatsby SSR, Gatsby client, right? So he has different files for the different sections of the hooks of the plugin API. That's smart, and we need to do that. So this right here, in this plugin right here, this needs to change. instead of being index, we need to call it something like, like React static server and React static client. There's server hooks and there's client hooks. So we need to make that a priority, and also the way that we're going to have to load those gets a little tricky, because in the config, where we're getting the config, we're just recursing through plugins right here and resolving them. But these plugins are going to be server-side plugins. And maybe we should be calling the resolved plugins like .plugins needs to be, let's see, final config. These are going to be like server plugins, basically, right? But then we're going to have to, or they can just all be plugins. And maybe right here we resolve just the file location to the client ones. But we don't want to import the client plugin files on the server, because that's going to import unnecessary stuff. We also don't want to import the server plugin files on the client, because that's going to run into a lot of problems. So we need to figure this out. I have a few ideas that we can talk about offline. But one of them would be just not importing the client-side plugins here, but just keeping track of the file location, and then doing another generated file that provides all of the plugin stack to the client, that we could just generate and say, hey, import all these plugins, and load them into this plugins variable that we can then export and import into, like the router, and import into the link component and all those different areas. I'll outline that in a new issue as soon as we get done with this call. So were kind of my main concerns for the plugin system. I can't really think of any others that were really bothering me. So really with V6, there's a few things we need to do. We need to do React 16fi things. We need to do the plugin API for, client-side plugins. We need to test the pages directory support for like nested routes. And then we just need to test the crap out of it. We already have a lot of tests, but we need to improve any testing that we can, and really try and like dog food V6 in our own sites. So just test it for breaks, test it to make sure that we're not shipping something that's terrible. I guess that wouldn't be testing. That would be called experimenting. It's really all I had planned. Wow, it is 11:42. We've almost been going for 2 hours. So that's a long call. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? Anything that's still unclear in terms of how React Static does something, or maybe if you have something specific you want to work on in React Static or contribute to, but you feel like you don't understand it fully and that the group would benefit from talking about it?
I have just one thing.
Okay.
And well, at the beginning of the discussion, you were talking about SEO.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like some sort of schemas and JSON LD files. I mean, not the files, but metadata that you want for the crawlers and
Yep.
search engines. So can you do that with the plugins? I mean, the thing that we're going to write on V6. So add some sort of metadata.
Yes, you can, because the head, like there are hooks for like the head and for the body that we're going to be able to inject a lot of stuff into. The hooks are also going to have access to all of the final routes. So you can go through the routes and it'll have access to all of the routes and the data. There will be client-side hooks for the head as well. So, if really what if you want to look into doing some SEO type stuff, you should look into JSON LD. It would be awesome to have a plugin that just kind of does all of your JSON LD for you. Like, hey, just put in your image or your image information or your description and all of your like SEO information, and it just automatically puts it in. So let's see. There's JSONLD.js. I don't know what this is, but JSONLD is just it's the next generation of schema definition. Instead of doing it in XML, which I really hated, and if you've ever done SEO, it sucks as well. JSONLD is a lot more friendlier. So, but yeah, it's all going to be based on hooks. Really, hooks and plugins should be the future of React Static. Not to the point where to do anything in React Static, you have to have a plugin. I don't like that about Gatsby, where the plugin API is also like the personal API. They should be similar, but accessibility, like I think a regular API on the config is much more accessible. So sorry, that's
I also have like a quick question about the Gatsby thing. So in terms of marketing, you probably want people to move from Gatsby to React Statics. I know that that's not like a cool sentence, but yeah. But anyway, do you think we should be like backward compatible in terms of converting already existing Gatsby plugins into like V6 of React Static?
I hope Swix is still here, because Swix probably has something to say about this. But Swix was talking to me earlier about
It's obviously yes.
Gatsby plugin Compat. Actually, it would probably be React. hold on. That's funny. It'd be React Static plugin Gatsby plugin.
Wow.
What?
But because React Static plugin is the kind of the prefix namespace for all the plugins. At least that's what I'm trying to get people to do. It makes it easy to find them. But like this would basically be like, hey, if you want to use a Gatsby plugin in React Static. And so there would be like there'd be an API translation layer that takes Gatsby API and translates it to React Static API. Obviously, not everything will be supported, but some will. So that could be an interesting marketing tool. I mean, I don't even know if it's possible yet, but that is such a cool idea, and Swix, do you have anything to say about that?
I think we should do it.
Yeah, obviously.
So I just want to say I want to be part of it. So ping me.
Okay. If somebody wants to create an issue for this as a discussion, then that would be fantastic. And also afterwards, I'm going to take this entire discussion and put it into the all of these notes right here, and I'm going to put them into that issue about maintainers and contributors and stuff. Okay. So the PR, this is something I forgot to talk about. So listen, up until this point, it's just been me. I'm the only person on the entire front-end UX team at Nozzle.io. Co-founder team, I am the end all. So I don't have a lot of time on my hands. I built React Static for Nozzle, but it's really starting to become a big project, which is why we're all having this call. So one of the biggest things that I've had a hard time doing is just having time to design good sites and marketing material for React Static. If any of you out there are designers, or you feel like you got a knack for it, and you're just looking for something to do, man, the React Static website would be a perfect place to start. And the documentation. Like the documentation needs a big upgrade. needs a big upgrade because it's too sparse in some areas. You know, there's no search. It looks kind of dull. Like it looks very get booky, you know. And I'd like to have it look more branded.
For what it's worth, I thought it was better than Gatsby V1 before they did the recent redesign.
Yeah, and I like the way that Gatsby redid their docs to look more branded. I think some of their documentation is way too long in some areas, which that's more due to their own APIs and their own fault rather than their documentation.
I mean, they also have a full-time person on it.
Right.
So.
And you know, that's another thing to remember too. Gatsby and Next are backed by funding and large companies. Nozzle is small. And in fact, I don't really have any funding from Nozzle other than time to work on it. That's all I get. Like, I would love for Nozzle to be able to sponsor me to go to conferences and talk about React Static, but it's not a product of ours. It's a byproduct of Nozzle. And it's something we care about, but we can't put money into it right now, unfortunately. And that's okay, because it means that we need to really embrace the open source future of React Static. Like, you know, Gatsby has received funding to build professional tools on top of Gatsby, and right now they're using a lot of their manpower and cash probably to develop the open source version of it. It might seem unfair, sometimes it does, but that's just how it is right now. I can guarantee you that React Static will never be interested in anyone's money. And that's the way we need to keep it. React Static should be built by the people and for the people. Netlify is one company that is extremely, Netlify cares about RS because it's truly open source. Not that the others aren't, but that React Static is never going to try and become a company. We don't need it to be. And Netlify cares about having multiple options in the community other than just Gatsby and Next, you know? And so we need to care about the same thing. Some things that I'd really like you guys to think about is how we can make React Static work on Code Sandbox. How we can better get our examples into users' hands quickly.
That is actually I wanted to talk about, because like Gatsby, it has like a starter template and Code Sandbox right now. We could also work like for the marketing side. We could work on the integration, for example, with DocZ, which has like a hype for like have like React Static render all their documentations by using DocZ or other tools, for example. This sort of integration help people like get them running with React Static.
So one thing we need to do is anything that we do for React Static needs to be built with React Static. I came really close to building the docs with another thing, but I mean, we need to dog food React Static. So like that's something that I really want to make sure everybody's on board with is, you know, there might be better documentation generators out there, but React Static is also a great documentation generator as well. I don't know if you guys knew that. And that's one way that we're going to make that a better use case is by doing our own docs in it. So, sorry, really quick. This is a code sandbox I'm working on right now with Yves Compulse, if you don't know his name. That's his Twitter handle. But I'm working on this one right now. It's almost ready, and he said he's more than happy to make it a template as soon as we can get it working. So I'll paste that in there. In fact, I'm going to paste it here in the chat. If you guys want to go look at it really quick. Yes, there's also this talk right here that was done just yesterday or the day before. You guys should go look at that too. So yeah, like PR, this is something that we just need to grow the community. There needs to be more people and more minds. And you know, we don't have a PR team or a company behind React Static. And so the best thing that we can do is make sure that the code is easy to understand and accessible And the contributors, you guys, the maintainers, us, we're going to be the biggest force behind React Static getting better and becoming more popular. So, you know, be active on Twitter. You know, tag React Static JS if you can. You know, share stuff. Try and help people. We need help me triage issues. It's going to be kind of PR. There's also help on the spectrum.chat/React Static. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but the Spectrum, this is where we do kind of overall chat for, you know, not necessarily support for like bugs, but support for just questions on implementation and whatnot. So people just kind of ask random questions and we can help out there. You guys would be great if we could all be present there every once in a while. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? I feel like 2 hours is plenty long for a meeting. We should probably wrap this up in 5 minutes. So.
No, this is great, Tanner.
Okay.
I have a small question, Tanner.
Yeah, go for it.
Do we have an actual roadmap somewhere? Because I was looking for it earlier, but I couldn't find one.
Yeah, so we kind of need to take all of this and shove it into the V6 roadmap. It's on the V6 branch right now under roadmap.md. I know there's some roadmap software and like services online that you can use. We could also use GitHub projects if somebody wants to do that as well. Well, I can't remember where those are. Compare dependencies, insights. I swear it's in here somewhere.
You gotta set it up in settings.
Oh yeah, and this is under the nozzle. So I'll go set up projects, but anything like that, like yeah, if you guys have suggestions, let's talk about the best way to organize all these like goals and projects and thoughts and stuff. So I'm going to be dumping this. In fact, I'll just do that right now. How can I dump this?
Got a quick question.
Yeah.
So I noticed, I was taking a look at the outstanding plugins, and it looks like there was some work being done at some point on a TypeScript plugin.
Yeah.
Where's that at?
Hold on just a second. Maintainers and contributors. Let me paste this in really quick. I don't have a lot of RAM in my brain, but okay. So the TypeScript. Okay, so that's the thing is up until this point, TypeScript has been maintained in an example on the old version. And so you can come in and you can see there's the TS config, there's a Webpack config here that did it just had all the aliases, right? But then there's also the Babel RC. Oh no, where is it? Let's see. TS config. Oh, okay. So I guess this was most of the work being done, but this is the only thing that I've really seen for TypeScript. There was some there's a path alias example. I don't do a lot of TypeScript at all, so I don't really know a whole lot about it, like how to set it up. I know how to read it and write it and stuff, but I just have never really used it in production. So this is where I know a lot of the work was being done with TypeScript. And the more of this we can move into a plugin, the better. I know that not all of the hooks are going to be there right now for TypeScript, and you know, we're going to have to add hooks as we go for that. There's also another TypeScript example in here, I thought, but I guess it's gone. In the V6 branch examples, the TypeScript example is still there. It's still using the old Webpack, just the old Webpack config hook. So we could totally move this into a plugin if you know, and the extensions, like you can add these in using a plugin. You can change the entry. Like you can see somebody already, oh, React Static plugin TypeScript. But they haven't actually moved these things into that plugin just yet. So I don't know if React Static Plugin TypeScript exists, if somebody has made it yet. It doesn't look like they have. So that's where it's been living.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll check out the examples.
Okay. Anything else? By the way, if you're curious what this is called Notion. Notion is pretty awesome. It's just like a markdown booklet that you can share with other people and whatnot. So, okay, well, if nobody has any more questions or anything else to say, like I think that's all I have for now. So as far as adding maintainers, you know, maybe I scared you away, but if I didn't, then just, you know, go to our maintainer issue and pop me an emoji with your name that says you want to be a maintainer or something like that. And I'm just going to start adding everybody with permissions to the repo, you know, and we can just go from there. And, you know, if you want admin privileges on the React Static Spectrum chat, then hit me up there. And I'll add you to those. Anything else you guys need? Like, I'm so glad that you guys are willing to help and to keep React Static going. I'll be honest, about a month or two ago, I almost just shut it down because Gatsby is a Goliath right now, and it was feeling like a lot like I was David. But you know, I feel like there's still a place for React Static, and lots of people love it. And it may be smaller and not have as much attention, but I believe that it's just that it can be just as powerful and just as useful to people. So I appreciate everybody's help. If anybody has anything else to say, go for it.
No, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll see you guys on GitHub, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Thank you.